that America is facing an epidemic of addiction to opioids like heroin and prescription painkillers. As of 2015, an estimated 2.6 million Americans were addicted to them, and they're now involved in almost 30,000 overdose deaths a year in the US.
The Border Patrol, ICE, they all want the wall.
We're starting to see heroin and meth a lot more. Usually those were reserved for the ports of entry, but now they started running those across the river as well.
Biggest problem is actually in New England, New York and North. We need to address this as two separate issues. We have a heroin problem in New York, up in New England, and we have an immigration problem at the border.
I declared a public health emergency in Scott County, Indiana, due to an outbreak of the HIV virus that has reached epidemic proportions. In a county the size of Scott County, the average number of HIV cases on an annual basis is roughly 5 cases. As I stand here today, we have 79 confirmed cases, and more testing is being done. And we expect that number to go up. Now, it's important to note that 100% of the 79 confirmed HIV cases have been traced to intravenous drug use.
The heroin overdose is really on the rise, even though the opiates are a much bigger problem right now, causing way more overdoses. We're going to see Virginia has a actually decreasing problem as we approach 2010, but we see what's coming next. Richmond is that little dot in the middle that just turned red. And wow, we've got a big increase in 2013 and 2014 along the north and headed straight down 95 south. We see nationwide that painkillers are the biggest problem, but heroin is the fastest growing in the last couple of years. What I really like about this chart is the marijuana line down at the bottom shows 0 deaths, which it's also used as a pain reliever.
We're going to look at one of the major causes of this crisis, prescription painkillers, which are chemical cousins of heroin. Around 75% of heroin users started with a prescription opioid, drugs like OxyContin, Vicodin and Percocet, which some take recreationally and others take as prescribed by a doctor. But however it starts, it can get out of hand fast. And given their risks, it's kind of amazing how freely doctors have prescribed them, because there are a lot in circulation.
We have currently nearly 250 million prescriptions for opioids written every year. That's enough for every adult in America to have a bottle of pills and then some.
Holy shit!
Right. Well, why people turn to heroin, you know, I mean, I think normally the model is where people just don't feel like they fit in for whatever reason, and they'll turn to pills, whether it be Percocet or oxycodone. And as the addiction progresses, they'll move on to heroin because it's a much cheaper drug, much easier to get on the street, and it's very inexpensive.
But it has become such an easy, quick move from prescription pain pills, which teenagers in high school are dancing around with, dabbling with, and they're moving straight to heroin because a pill of oxycodone on the street is $60 a pill, whereas a capsule of heroin is only $10.
Notice the red and the purple. The red goes up with the purple, but then the purple trails off. That's the opiates. Heroin is continuing to rise at an alarming rate and has overtaken and is now the biggest problem according to police officers.
Interestingly, as recently as the early 90s, doctors were excessively wary of prescribing opioids.
Back then, there was a thing called opiophobia. A lot of healthcare professionals did not want to prescribe opiates at all because they thought you give the slightest amount, you turn your patients into addicts. And so even people with stage 4 cancer weren't being given opiates. They were left to suffer.
Furthermore, in the 90s, a patient would overdose, or a couple of patients might overdose, and a doctor would end up being prosecuted for murder or manslaughter.
So how many, if we start from this side, have moved from prescription drugs to heroin? Everybody.
Yeah, heroin's so much more cheaper.
Once people became dependent on painkillers, they said they'd do almost anything to get them.
One time I was hurting so bad that I ended up punching a 4x4 and breaking all 3 of these fingers and this bone to get pain meds from my doctor. I did that several times.
So you'd hurt yourself in order to go to a doctor?
I had 9 teeth pulled out of my head for prescriptions.
At the time, that's how my
to get a
mind thought.
prescription.
I do not support needle exchange as anti-drug policy, but this is a public health emergency. And on the recommendation of the Centers for Disease Control, I am authorizing a focused, short-term, limited needle exchange program if local officials deem that to be necessary and appropriate.
The thing to notice in this chart is the disproportionate rise in heroin overdoses to heroin addiction. This is because the introduction of fentanyl is actually causing the overdoses and it's being blamed on heroin.
And fentanyl is a drug that is actually 50 to 100 times more potent, more powerful than heroin. And increasingly, fentanyl is showing up in our arrests, in our seizures, and increasingly fentanyl is killing people here in this state.
Where it's mixed in or sold as heroin, only it's much more dangerous.
The amount that's actually in what you're shooting up, I mean, is unknown to the person who is using.
We are now trying to track how it gets into America. Clearly, Afghanistan grows the vast majority of the world's poppy seeds. This map shows flows of heroin into New England from Africa, Cuba, and Colombia.
They're coming in illegally. Drugs are pouring in through the border. We have no country if we have no border. Hillary wants to give amnesty. She wants to have open borders. The border secure, as you know, the Border Patrol agents, 16,500 plus ICE last week endorsed me. First time they've ever endorsed a candidate. It means their job is tougher, but they know what's going on. They know it better than anybody. They want strong borders. They feel we have to have strong borders. I was up in New Hampshire the other day. The biggest complaint they have, it's with all of the problems going on in the world, many of the problems caused by Hillary Clinton and by Barack Obama, all of the problems, their single biggest problem is heroin that pours across our southern borders, just pouring and destroying their youth. It's poisoning the blood of their youth and plenty of other people. We have to have strong borders. We have to keep the drugs out of our country. Right now, we're getting the drugs, they're getting the cash. We need strong borders. We need absolute, we cannot give amnesty. Now, I want to build the wall. We need the wall. The Border Patrol, ICE, they all want the wall. If we stop the drugs, we shore up the border.
In a single year, the Coast Guard and Border Protection intercepted an astonishing $10 billion worth of drugs on the way to America.
This is the most sophisticated tunnel that has ever been discovered along the border.
But the story in Drudge, and big story, it's all over the place now. Guys swimming across, and big bags of stuff, it's drugs, swimming across the river, right? Swimming right across. And they put the drugs, and actually the camera crew, or the reporters, were petrified because they thought they were going to be killed. Because they're showing this on camera. The guy's carrying bags of stuff. It was drugs.
What type of drugs do you encounter and what quantities?
The most common is marijuana. We see thousands upon thousands of pounds weekly. We do see a lot of cocaine. We're starting to see heroin and meth a lot more. Usually those were reserved for the ports of entry, but now they started running those across the river as well. Usually those were reserved for the ports of entry.
We're taking a look at the heroin highway. And this was something that was new to me. This came from a member of our staff, this tip, about Interstate 70 and 81 leading out of Baltimore, going through Hagerstown, Martinsburg, West Virginia, Winchester, Virginia. Law enforcement in those areas saying that they're heroin addicts, this new wave of heroin addicts, which finds its source in prescription pain pill abuse for the majority, that they are driving to Baltimore, which is a heroin stronghold and has been for decades, sometimes twice a day to get their heroin.
We can kind of see patterns along the north and headed straight down 95 south.
All of the problems, their single biggest problem is heroin that pours across our southern borders, just pouring and destroying their youth.
Usually those were reserved for the ports of entry.
Biggest problem is actually in New England, New York and north. Up in northern New Jersey and New York, they're making the biggest busts with the highest purity, and all the cops know it. Officers in New York and New Jersey brag about heroin with purities of up to 90%. The higher potency heroin is evidence of a source of the heroin, We would notice that it would become less potent as it gets stepped on and more expensive as it travels across the United States, which it means that we have two problems. We have the border problem and we have the heroin problem. They're separate issues and we need to address them separately. I don't know how to solve the complex heroin problem, but one Band-Aid being tried by medics all across the country is this nasal spray called Narcan. It was a controversial decision, but Narcan is now being sold over the counter.
Ingham County Sheriff's Office is hoping their new purchase of Narcan will help save lives. It's a device that can reverse the effects of drug overdoses within minutes.
The deputy will put the nebulizer in the patient's nose. He injects part of the medication in one nose and then in the other nose as well. Then what they will do is they will ventilate the Narcan into the patient's body, and it counteracts the opiate receptors inside the brain.
When someone takes heroin, the drug locks onto receptors in the brain. It slows the body down. Lock up too many, and you stop breathing. Naloxone can free up those receptors, essentially bringing you back to life.
We tend to have more overdoses than we do fires. So it's a piece of equipment that we can't go without now, just like we have the hose.
I lost a friend to heroin just over a year ago. One of my friends, Drew White, for years we played soccer together. He actually had a great foot. He would take our corners and I would head him in. I have really fond memories of Drew. We go all the way back to 2nd grade. He was the first person I ever talked to about girls, like my little elementary school crushes. And I remember he actually looked up to me as a mathematician. I wasn't really able to connect with my close friends on math, but Drew was really good at math and we challenged each other. In high school, we rode the same bus together, but we lost touch because he really started going down the wrong path, and you know, I was not a part of that, and I found out last year that he overdosed and died, and I was really struck by it. Clearly this epidemic really affected me, and I think it really affected many people. It's a very important problem that the wall is not going to solve unless we're going to build the wall in Manhattan. Immigration is still a very important problem. It doesn't necessarily mean the wall is a bad idea. We just need to attack the heroin problem the correct way.
The Democrats don't care about your lives or your jobs. Immigration and a border wall is the great unifier. Trump promises to put Americans first, to protect their neighborhoods, but most of all to bring jobs back, to end these job-killing trade deals. He is the first person to ever come along and say, maybe we should care about just emptying out the manufacturing base of America and to stop dumping low-wage workers on the country. I mean, that is the big issue he has.
We have 95 million Americans out of the labor force right now. 1 in 5 American families don't have one person in their family working. So 11 million illegals, more coming every day, competing for fewer jobs, driving down wages. Who has been disproportionately impacted? What demographic group more than any other?
Right. No,
Black Americans.
I'm Carol.
My perspective is if Trump loses, that's it. There's no more story. There's no more story. Because if Trump loses, what's going to happen is Hillary's going to get in. Hillary is going to legalize. And boy, you'll find out just how many illegal immigrants there are in America when Hillary gets in and tries to draw them out onto the citizenship and voter rolls. If Ann Coulter's right, it's going to be like 20 or 30 million. 20 or 30 million guaranteed new votes for the Democrats. Plus, she's going to be importing lots of people from the third world, from Muslim countries and so on. Again, guaranteed votes for the Democrats. That's it. There will be no Republican Party ever again. I mean, it's like California. California used to be a reliably Republican state until good old Republican hero Ronald Reagan went and gave amnesty, and now it's as red can be, and there's no possibility of recovering it. That's the rest of the United States if Trump loses. If Trump loses, there's no spine left to stand up for America. There's no spine left to inspire people in Europe. I'm telling you, and I know it's coming down to these last 2 weeks, don't believe the polls. Get out there and act. I say this to the people listening and watching this. If Trump loses, that's it. The Republic and the West is done.
1 in 5 people that we catch has some type of criminal history here in the United States. On top of that, we only catch 40% of what's coming across as actual in this area. So that's 20% of what we catch are known bad guys. You can only imagine what the other 60% of people that are coming across, who they are or what their plans are. We have no idea. The interesting part is they're not staying here in the Rio Grande Valley. A lot of these folks are using it as a waypoint to move forward, whether it's the people themselves or drugs. It's all going through the area, and it's going into larger communities like the San Antonios, the Austins, the Dallas, all the way up to Virginia, Maryland, D.C., Chicago. They're all headed that way.